After last week's update, I had a few people ask me to look at the water around Puma Punku. This project keeps on demanding that I zoom out and take more into consideration, and while my map is big, it's not that big. So I found this map of Lake Titicaca on CG Trader. I'll put the link in the description. Puma Punku would be in the lower right-hand corner of this map. In order to incorporate the entire natural water system around Tiwanaku, I need to consider the drainage from the mountains to the lake. Puma Punku sits inside a large, fertile farm valley that drains towards the lake. And pretty much as you would expect, the water drainage follows the river's path. I've been reading a book by Hugo, Boero, Rojo called Discovering Tiwanaku, and in it he says the Tiwanakans reaped abundant harvests, allowing them to devote solely 1/3 of their time to agriculture and the remaining 2/3 to the development and embellishment of their great city. So I began to doubt that the lake was much higher today than it was back then, and I wanted to find out more about the agriculture in the area. So I found this research paper by Clark Erickson about pre-Columbian raised field farming around Lake Titicaca. And it shows that Puma Punku would sit squarely in the ancient farming valley. The research paper included this satellite photo of what the raised fields looked like. Kind of a tryptophobic pattern. The light areas are the raised fields, and the darkened areas would have been irrigation channels. This looks like a satellite photo from the 80s and did not come with coordinates, but I found this research paper, and it did show some coordinates. So then I headed over to Google, and honestly, I thought this would be more difficult, but the raised fields are just very easy to see. I find it interesting that even after the subsequent centuries, the raised fields still show through. So I got lost looking at the raised fields for quite a long time. The patterns are fascinating, and it looked as if the homestead stood on these oval areas. They're spaced out in a similar density to the current population of homes. Quoting Hugo Rojo, the Incan Empire started to rise following the decline of the Tiwanaku Empire, and the Incan rulers set out to erase the tradition of the magnificent Tiwanaku culture, so that they themselves would be revered as gods, and nothing would cast a shadow on their divine ancestry. Recent archaeology investigations seem to prove that the people of Tiwanaku constructed and operated a hydraulic system through which water from the lake was channeled behind a ridge north of Tiwanaku to a vast stretch of farming land close to the city. This could be the answer to the question of how the people of Tiwanaku were able to obtain such high yields from the land, and thus dedicate most of their creative leisure time to the city. Rojo believes that Puma Punku was the temple center for a successful farming community. The Inca had no form of currency, and all the land was owned by the state. When a couple married, they were given land, a home, and some animals. As they had children, more land would be given. Any excess food was given back to the state. Every citizen owed a debt of manual labor, and this manual labor was used to build the community. The system was used by the Inca, but it may have originated under the Tiwanaku. Through the system, every square inch of usable land was terraced and irrigated. This is an ancient feat of engineering and agriculture that I just have no comparison for. We have been looking at this side of the lake, but we need to start looking at this side of the lake because this is where Puma Punku is located. And unfortunately, this side of the lake, there's not a lot that remains. This was one location that I was able to find. I'd be interested to see what you guys find, and if you do find anything, please put it in the comments section and I'll add it to the map. So going back to the lake levels, I found this research paper on the historical levels of Lake Titicaca, and it shows that the lake was in fact a bit lower than it sits today. The research also showed time periods when the lake waters greatly receded. I'll quote directly from the conclusion in the paper. The final low lake stand is coincident with the decline of the raised field agriculture and the collapse of the Tiwanaku culture. Even more provocatively, at least one other low stand was approximately coincident with the transition from earlier Chirpa culture to the Tiwanaku. This is a book I highly recommend on Tiwanaku. I love the piece of late Empire Tiwanaku pottery on the cover. The ability to capture and describe human form in this way, it's a masterpiece of artistry and observation. I mean, the time it requires for artists to get to this point in society, few achieved in ancient times. The book is a great read and incorporated a bunch of perspectives on the site, but presents a logical local account. This picture stuck out to me and I kept on coming back to it. The description reads, a 7-centimeter long stone whistle, apparently a reduced scale model or reproduction of a room or dwelling typical of the Tiwanaku culture. Then I realized why it looks so familiar. The book describes an amazing culture. The Tiwanaku performed successful brain surgery, evidenced by bone growth, meaning the people lived. And they performed cranial deformations. They were an advanced community that had the power to forge copper. They used this technology to subjugate their neighbors who were still living in the Stone Age. They used weapons like the Brain Crusher, a copper-spiked ring that was fastened to the end of a stick. Finally, I'm enamored by the style of characters I see on the Sun Gate. There's a lot of theories about what the gateway represents, but I haven't heard anything that I really believe just yet. The gate would have had a thin layer of metal, and precious stones would have been inlaid to all the eyes. I read that the back of the gate had functioning metal doors with hinges. Evidence of the removed hinges can be seen here. Also, I found this site called Digital Archaeological Records, where you can download a high-res scan of the gateway. It's an enormous file. It has 17 million polygons. I've really been imagining what this would have looked like in its glory. The detail is so amazing in its current state. I've seen a theory where the gateway was actually at the top of the stairs leading into the temple at Puma Punku. I think this might have been true too. There was also a fourth gateway considered in the book Stones of Tiwanaku. So the gateway of the sun might not have been inside the structure, but rather leading up to the structure. I need to look into that more, and I'll keep you updated on what I figure out there. When Hugo Rojo looked at the site, he concluded a period of increasingly prolonged drought progressively ruined the economy of Tiwanaku, with the end result of political deterioration followed by a general weakening of the community that rendered the capital of the empire easy prey to invading enemy tribes, who at a later stage gave rise to the Inca Empire. I think this view of Tiwanaku has many data points. I don't know, you tell me what you guys think.